video is part of my Music Theory for Pianists series, where I cover the essential concepts that you need for music theory to be the best pianist and musician that you can be.
Well, I'm just trying to be the best I can be.
Today's video is covering intervals, how they work, and why you need to know them.
Please tell me why.
Another name for an interval is dyad, which just means two, die, and then add, note, two notes. And that is because an interval is defined as the distance between two notes.
How could they measure it?
If the periodic table of elements is the building blocks for all of the compounds that we see within life, intervals function the same way within music.
This is how it's done.
Intervals are the foundations for our scales and our chords and the structures that we use to make music. Understanding intervals is why I can read music pretty well. And it's because I can see the patterns within the music instead of going note by note.
The rarer its rules, the more I see the patterns.
Because I'm seeing the interval relationships. All scales are made of what we call seconds, intervals of seconds, and all chords are made of intervals of thirds. If you can see this spatial relationship on your music, you're seeing larger chunks and you're seeing whole phrases instead of, again, just singular notes.
You gotta think big picture.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of intervals, there's a few concepts that you must understand.
Lay it on me!
Fortunately, I have a video on them, so if these are, unfamiliar or you're just not quite sure, definitely check out that video. I'll have like a link down here. You'll be good to go. Those concepts are half steps, so being able to move to the very next key, regardless of whether it's a black key or white key. Whole steps, which just basically means two half steps together. Accidentals, sharps, flats, and naturals. And lastly, enharmonic notes, which is basically two ways to write the same pitch. So C sharp and D flat are examples of enharmonic pitches.
It's the same thing.
If you feel comfortable with these concepts, you are ready to move on to understanding how intervals work. Intervals have two distinct components: quality and quantity.
Both the quality and the quantity.
We are going to focus first on quantity, which is just the distance between the two notes on the staff. Let's take a look at all the different types of intervals we have, starting with a unison. A unison is the same pitch, so that would be two of the same notes, right? And then we go all the way up to an eighth, an octave. So we have our unison, our first, seconds, thirds, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. Now, it is very important to note right from the beginning, you want to memorize these spatial relationships.
You can memorize this by dinner time tomorrow?
For instance, a second is always a step on the sheet music, right? So the very next note is always a step. And then if you look at the keyboard, a second is the very next note on the keyboard. So that direct correlation is really important. The same thing for thirds. Right? A third is a skip, right? A line to a line, a space to a space, and thirds on the keyboard skip a note, right? C to E, for instance. So let's say if we start from middle C, that line to the first line on our treble clef, that is a third, and we have a skip, a note in between on the keyboard. So seeing that spatial relationship helps you understand what to play on the keyboard without actually having to read all of those notes in your sheet music. And as I always say, music is written on a grid.
Grid, 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 grid.
So because of that grid relationship, a fourth is always a fourth. A fifth is always a fifth. A sixth is always a sixth. It doesn't matter what starting note it's written on. And that's because the distance between the points is always measured the same. So this is so important. Like when I'm looking at chords, like lots of notes, I can just read literally one note in the chord. And by seeing the spatial relationship of the notes, I can play the other like 3 notes, 4 notes in that chord just by reading the one note and looking at that interval relationship. The next component of intervals is quality, right? What does that mean? So let's take a look at some music real quick. Let's say we have a C and a D. And we also have a C and a D flat. These are both seconds because C to D is a step on the staff, right? But they're different notes. So the quality of the interval further identifies the interval relationship between the two notes. So in this example, the C to a D is a major second and the C to the D flat is a minor second. So the reason in that example we had the major second and minor second is because of the half step relationships between those notes. So we measure quality by half steps and whole steps between notes. We have 5 different types of interval quality. So we have major, minor, diminished, augmented, and perfect. So examples of intervals would be a major third, a minor sixth, an augmented fifth, so on and so forth. Now, this is a lot all at once, so when I first start with students, we just do quantity at first. One, because the more practical application for sheet music is just seeing that spatial relationship on the graph, but also like counting all those half steps and stuff, it's kind of hard at first. But I do like to add in quality for seconds and thirds, and only major and minor, but this is because seconds and thirds are how we make our chords. So if you understand major and minor interval quality for seconds and thirds, you can construct scales and you can construct basic chords and see their function within your sheet music. So taking a look at this chart, we're gonna ignore basically everything past thirds, right? But for seconds, a minor second is 1 half step, a major second is 2 half steps, and now a minor third is 3 half steps, and a major third is 4 half steps. Memorize these relationships. Minor second, 1 half step, major second is 2 half steps. Minor third, 3 half steps, major third is 4 half steps. So, how do we solve for intervals? Well, as I mentioned earlier, you must always do quantity first. Always quantity. And I'll give you an example why. We're gonna take a look at C and D sharp and C and E flat. Now you should be able to recognize that D sharp and E flat are enharmonic notes. So it's the same pitch, but where they're written on the staff changes the type of interval that it is. So if we go from C to E flat, that is, so we go from C, right? So C sharp, D, E flat, 3 half steps. Now it's obviously because of the same thing, C to D sharp is the same 3 half steps. Now one of these is a minor third, one of these is not. If you do quantity first, you've already checked your work, right? Because C to D is a second. And in this case, C to D sharp is actually what we would call an augmented second. But C to E flat is our minor third. And this is so important because how these notes are written is not arbitrary. These are chosen because composers are specifically choosing to outline certain chord or scale relationships in the music with the accidentals that they choose. So, as I said, first step, quantity, and then second step is to count your half steps. One thing to note, and this is like a pretty common mistake that I see students make at first, don't count the first note as a half step, right? Because C to C, you literally have not moved. It's not 1 yet, you're still at 0. So make sure you do not make that mistake. I mean, you wouldn't be the first nor the last to do it, but I always try and say it just to remind you right from the beginning. Let's try a few examples to see if we can solve the quantity and quality of different seconds and thirds. Let's take a look at this first example, right? We got a G and a B on our bass clef. So first thing, quantity first, right? G to B, we see it's a skip, and a skip is the same thing as a third. So we know our quantity is a third, and now we just have to count our half steps. So remember, you don't count G first, it's the note above the G. So we go from G, G sharp, A sharp, B. So we have 4 half steps. So G to B is a major third. All right, let's try another one. How about, let's take a look at this treble clef example here. We're gonna go from E to F sharp. So what is our quantity? Well, we are stepping. So remember, steps are the same thing as seconds. So we have a second, and now we just have to count our half steps. So we go from E, F, F sharp, 2 half steps. That is a major second. Practice these a few times in a row. Make sure that you get more and more comfortable counting those half steps between notes to determine your interval functions. And as I said earlier, these are the building blocks for our chords and our scales. So for instance, a major triad is a major third and a minor third on top of it. Or if we're building a scale, for instance, let's just say like a 5-note major pentascale, you need a major second, a minor second, and a major second. So if you understand those basic interval relationships, you can see the scale like on the keyboard, you can see it on the music. And it's all about, one, memorizing those half steps, but seeing and feeling those half steps as well, and the interval names that we give them. All right, quick recap.
Let's recap.
So, intervals, the distance between two notes, also called a dyad. Dyad, two notes. Next, intervals are the building blocks of chords and scales.
I think these shiny things are the building blocks of the universe, man.
So, understanding our interval relationships, especially seconds and thirds, is how we see the larger structure of chords and scales within our music. Thirdly, intervals have two components.
Only two.
Quantity and quality. We went over all the different types of quantity, right? So unison, a first, all the way up until an octave, which is an eighth. And, you know, just in case you were curious, if you go past an octave, we do have names for those, 9ths, 10ths, 11ths, but it's the same thing. It's like C to D, right? That's a second. But if I go C to D an octave up, that's a 9th or a compound second. So it's really the same thing. It's just kind of confusing to add that stuff in there. So just so you know, it exists, but just refer to things as unison to an octave, first to eighth. Next, when you are trying to determine an interval, you must always, always go quantity first. Quantity and then quality, and then you will avoid making enharmonic mistakes. And lastly, and as always, apply it to your music.
Read it, apply it.
So look at the relationship between notes. Ask yourself, what kind of interval is this? Play it, hear it, be it. You will understand the concepts if you have a direct relationship with your instrument and said concepts. All right, that is a wrap on my video about intervals. I hope you learned some good things about the building blocks, the essential elements of music. As always, drop a like, a comment, don't forget, subscribe to the channel, help your boy out. Definitely want to get this information to as many people as possible because like, music is dope, man. I love sharing it and I love being able to do it in this format with anyone that will take the time to listen. If you would like to support the channel and the content that I am creating, check out www.thepowerfulpiano.com. Always got some sick merch over there. Make sure you get yourself a hoodie so you're gonna look good, or shirt, look nice, get it right, and support a good cause. So as always, good luck with the practice and stay powerful, y'all.